And I know that many in New Zealand think they hear too much Maori now. I think that's a mistake. The more they become comfortable with the language, the better it will be. And of course, countries across the world speak more than one language. That is not unique or anything else. I mean, that's quite common in many parts of the world. Most of Europe speaks more than one language. And so we will become more comfortable with the Maori language.
And your advice to your mokopuna?
Learn Maori if you have the opportunity. Yeah. Learn and understand it, because it'll give you a better understanding of Maori people.
Well, e mihi ana ki a koe, e te rangatire I tēnei wā. I raro I te tuanui o tō whare, kei wainganui I tō whānau. Can I take the opportunity to thank you for participating in the interview, which will be a living record of your contribution, your courage and your conviction to lead New Zealand to a different place through the treaty settlement process. Nō reira, tēnā koe, tēnā tātou. I thought we might just start really with a curious question. How did a boy raised in Rahotu Taranaki and then moving to the King Country form such strong views about New Zealand history, the impact of the land confiscations and where that might take you in your life?
That's a very good question. And obviously, when you start on this sort of a journey, you're not sure where it's going. I think, however, that my intuitive sympathy for the story of Maori, whose land had been confiscated, was partly influenced by my Irish history. My parents came to New Zealand in 1930 from Ireland. And while they didn't talk about Irish history very much, I wish they'd talk more, they also were people whose land had been stolen, and stolen by the same people. And that was somewhere in my background. I'm sure that had an influence on me. But really, the beginning of this journey was after the 1975 election, and I was made the Undersecretary to the Minister of Maori Affairs. In that role, which was Duncan McIntyre, I chaired the Maori Affairs Select Committee in Parliament. You might think it a bit unusual to have a Pākehā chairing the Maori Affairs Select Committee, but I chaired that. And in that, about the first thing we did was to listen to the petition of Dame Whina Cooper. And most will remember, who know our history at all, that magnificent photo of Whina Cooper with her granddaughter in one hand and a stick in the other, heading off to Wellington with her petition. And the petition was that no further Maori land should be alienated. That's the short order of the petition. And I have a copy of it on the wall. I think it's so significant. And chairing the committee, listening to Whina Cooper, telling her story, telling the story of Maori about the land confiscations, was very moving, deeply influenced my thinking, moved my thinking on further. And from that, I decided shortly thereafter that we had to settle to the best of our ability. And that's all you can do. What is fair? What's the best you can do to resolve ancient grievances? There's no question, there's no debate that the land was stolen, not only the Waikato-Tainui land, but much more, much more. The land we farmed in Taranaki, my parents' farm, was West Coast Settlement Reserve leases, which was again Maori land. Then the Crown decided they should be leased to non-Maori, and then they should be leased in perpetuity. So in other words, they were confiscated because perpetuity meant Maori never got that land back. There's the Taranaki Maori this time. Aotearoa, probably. And so from that beginning grew my conviction that New Zealand had to front up acknowledge and seek the fairest settlement they could to the Maori claims that reached back to early European settlement. And that's what started me on the journey.
Were there people that you can recall as a young boy that helped form some of your thinking about New Zealand history and why it was so important to understand our history and build those types of bridges that you have worked your lifetime to build?
And grew up in a community, and our neighbours on the little farm we had in coastal Taranaki were Maori on both sides. And obviously we knew them. But the story that stays in my memory of a little girl saying, it's quite innocent but so powerful, that the missionaries came and taught them to close their eyes, close their hands and look up to God. And then they stole the land from under our feet. And why I should remember this 70 or 80 years on, I'm not sure. But I remember that little girl saying that. And probably didn't reflect much on it at the time at all. Just a little story that a little girl was prattling on about. But as I thought longer, as I got older, there was so much truth in that, And it wasn't only the missionaries. But, so that helped to inform my conviction, a very strong conviction, that we had to seek to resolve it. And then, of course, you had to have the problem of what was resolution. I mean, you had millions and millions of dollars worth of land that had been taken. How did you address that? And that's where the leadership of people like the late Sir Robert Mahuta was so important, because they had to accept what was realistic. I used to use the term, what's realistic for that generation, this more recent generation, to resolve the crimes of an earlier generation.
Mm.
And that was a judgment call.
It certainly was a judgment call. And when you entered into politics in the 70s, early 70s, how would you have characterised race relations at the time?
I probably would have said they're excellent, because compared with many other countries, they were. But I wouldn't have given much thought, I hadn't given much thought to the issue at all. I mean, I was invited by the National Party to stand. I wasn't an activist in politics. I was just a farm leader, a young farm leader with a view on issues and prepared to articulate. And I guess through my life, I've been prepared to speak up on issues. And that certainly served me well when we started treaty settlements, because I had to speak up on issues, because a significant proportion of New Zealanders weren't prepared for it. They almost weren't aware of it. They were aware of it, but it didn't register with them, and they didn't believe. I had more than one say to me, well, Maori have the same opportunities as everybody else. What's all this fuss about? Mm. And there's people still doing that today. Mm. So we still have a journey to go as a country. We still have a journey to go. But the good news is we're quite a distance along the road.
Mm. And when you moved to the King Country, were there members of the Māori community that you had formed a relationship with that helped your thinking in terms of the political issues of the day?
Well, when I moved to the King Country, we didn't know a soul there. I had decided I'd been milking cows since I was a 9-year-old. At the end of the war with a neighbour, helping him when his son went to the war. And I decided I'd become a sheep farmer and bought the little sheep farm at Tikawiri, middle of the King Country, but I was not aware of the history of the region, or the confiscations of Waikato lands and so forth. No, it just was another piece of land, and it was a good piece of land, and we did that. So progressively, I got to learn of the history of the country or the part of the country I was in. And of course it was, a very sad history as far as that goes. And that's where I think my Irish ancestry came in to help, because it resonated with me, the land being stolen. That's what had happened to Ireland. And people, we don't teach this in New Zealand, but, they created the country of Northern Ireland by the English taking sort of, 25% of Ireland to give Ireland its independence. So you take some of the land. And you reflect on that and you think, God, what a terrible thing.
There are some people that say that the passionate attributes of the Irish correspond directly with Māori, and that when it comes to land, when it comes to women, that's where you see the passion of the Irish, and the Māori absolutely sit side by side.
Yes, well, I recall a Catholic priest on the coast there who described Māori as brown-skinned Irishmen. So the same point, that there are attributes and approaches that are broadly similar, I'd have to say. Yeah, no, that's very true. So that, if I go back to listening to Dame Whenekupa's petition and chairing that committee, and I think that was very influential in helping me form my views and understanding of what confiscations meant and how that had, destroyed Maori economy. Of course, the greatest asset had been taken, their land. And it was interesting that the countries of Europe, and that's New Zealand's just one minor example, the countries of Europe believed they could go across the world and take the land from brown-skinned people across the world and draw the boundaries wherever they want to. I mean, the classic of that is to look at Africa and look at how those boundaries are drawn in straight lines and so forth. And that, again, was Europeans just decided they were superior and they could fix it up to their advantage.
We can't leave the King Country without going to perhaps a relationship that you may have held with another politician, which is Koro Wetiri. Mm-hmm. When did you first come across Koro, and what were the issues of the day that required you to engage together?
Well, Koro and I got on very well. He, of course, was the member for Western Maori. So we were two members of Parliament. The King Country had two members of Parliament. They had Koro and they had me. And, of course, there were many issues where we both worked together on them. And that was our sort of responsibility. But it was also our natural instincts. And Koro and I got on extraordinarily well together. We never had a harsh word between us. And we worked to try and advance primarily the King Country was what our responsibilities were. So greatly enjoyed my time with Koro.
How did that political relationship work, given that you were from two different parties?
Didn't bother us at all. I don't think it ever entered into the discussion. Mm. We dealt with the issues, not with politics. And no, you're interested. You're right to say two different parties, but no, it never intruded.
And if you were to characterise the style of politics, focusing on the King Country, having common aspirations for the King Country, coming from different sides of the political spectrum, but getting to Wellington and being able to advocate almost as if being on the same page, does that require a certain type of skill or leadership value base?
It required both Koro and I to concentrate on what we needed to concentrate on, which was what issues we could help push forward that would help the King Country. And I don't think we ever had a disagreement on what would help the King Country. So it was just a good relationship. Politics didn't enter into it. We left that for Wellington and we carried on with what we needed to do.
Were there types of issues where yourself and Koro got together and said, look, we've got to, we've absolutely got to advocate for this for our region, that you both highlighted with one another? Were there any issues?
Well, I'm not sure there was any particular issues, but I remember once we were trying to build a freezing works and we were both on one side to do that because that's what the local farmers needed. Eventually it didn't happen because the meat board wouldn't give us a license. We wanted to spend our own money to build the plant and they wouldn't give us a license. I changed that law when I became Prime Minister. I mean, there were stupid things, and I guess in every country, but there were some stupid rules.
And is there a fond memory about Koro in particular that you'd like to share?
Oh, many, because we went to so many events together and we'd be often seated beside each other at events and so forth. And we just got on well as friends.
Mm.
It happened to be two different parties, but that made little or no difference.
Can I walk you towards the period of time as you were working through the quota management system with regards to fisheries and moving into discussing the potential of a fisheries settlement with iwi and Māori? Who were the individuals that you were working with at the time?
Well, the three leaders that I spoke to about that was not only Bob Mahuta, but Graham Latimer and Stephen O'Regan. Those were the three leaders I got into my office to discuss the way we could go. And the Minister of Fisheries at that time, Doug Kidd, had drawn to my attention that Sealord was selling a big chunk of quota. And we decided that that was about the amount we needed to settle Māori, the global Māori fisheries claim. And here it was coming up for sale. So we didn't have to take it off anybody. It was there on the market. So we moved quickly on that. Doug Kidd was the Minister of Fisheries, and we agreed to take that quota, and then we agreed with the Māori leadership. But that was a pan-Māori settlement, of course. But we very wisely left the division between iwi to iwi and kept a long way away from it because there was nothing we could add to that. They had to move and work on that.
And what do you recall about the leadership traits between Sir Graham, Tātipine and Sir Robert at the time, which enabled you to sit across the table and work something out?
A sensible pragmatism. They knew, as I knew, there was no absolutes in this. We were dealing with an ancient grievance of enormous size. But we had to do what was, in my words, fair. Not pretending that this was full compensation or anything. What was fair for that generation of New Zealanders, that current one, which is our current one, to settle with and make available to Māori. And as I say, this was pan-Māori, not iwi. And and that's what we did. And we were, all four of us, were realists and pragmatists. And how do we move forward? We were all committed to moving forward, and that was important. That leadership is to move people past where they are at the moment to a better future. And it is to have the capacity to see that better future. That's why it's so important that governments talk about the future, not always criticising the past. And we were prepared to do that.
And taking your cabinet colleagues along this journey of being able to see the future in a space where this was all new.
Well, it was, and it was quite a task with some of them who had no conceptual base. As far as they were concerned, Māori had the same opportunity as everybody else. Let's get on with it, let's not bother about it. And explaining to them that, no, the histories are totally different, and history had to be respected and resolved.
If I can say, the reference attributed to you was a great helmsman, and many would say also a great statesman, but in brokering opportunities for a negotiated outcome sitting across the table from iwi, as well as taking your cabinet colleagues and the rest of New Zealand with you towards this new place, What types of skills did you draw on to be able to get to that moment of saying, right, we're going to do it?
Somewhere I inherited the skills I needed to do the negotiations. But I think primarily it was respecting the other side and trying to see issues from the perspective of Maori who had lost their land or lost their fisheries. And inside me, instinctively, I knew that was wrong, that they should not have lost all that. That was theft. That was just theft and pure common sense to, and it needed to be resolved.
Mm.
Then I equally knew you couldn't resolve it in the sense of going back to where you began because life had moved on, the world had moved on, ownership had moved on. So it was a matter of having the pragmatism necessary to see a solution. And to lead, you have to see a better tomorrow. Otherwise, you're not a leader. You've got to see that different tomorrow and a better tomorrow. And that's what I could see.
There were people that supported your government that didn't agree with the fishery settlement and thought that that was counter to the future that would benefit them or their iwi. Are there conversations that you had to have with other iwi who supported you personally and your party that required you to, I think, adopt, I guess, a pragmatic approach to bring them forward into this space?
Well, it had to be a pragmatic approach because there was no perfect approach. It's what's the best we can do today? I used to ask myself, what is fair? I think that's a hugely important word, fair. What's fair in these circumstances? Now we have moved to where we are. What's fair going forward? To my mind, it was fair that Maori should have a big chunk of fisheries. Demonstrably, they had fished the oceans from the time of their arrival. And it was the same with other things. I'd ask that question many times, what is fair? And from there, I'd move forward.
Well, how did you explain it to the likes of Api Mahuika, who had a real challenge trying to agree with the fisheries settlement?
I would sit down and argue with them and trust in my capacity to persuade them.
Mm. Those were very intimate and close conversations, no doubt.
And there was respect both ways. You know, we respected each other even when we disagreed. And you could move forward from that.
And with personalities like Maturata in those early years, were there any discussions or engagements that you could recall with Matu that helped inform your own thinking or the negotiations?
No, I don't think Matu's discussions helped me in that regard. I mean, he was hugely important in the sense that he took through the Waitangi Tribunal and so forth. And those were very important building blocks to build a structure where their debates could be held and so forth. But ultimately, the debates had to be held between leaders. And I always quote the Ngā Tahu settlement. And Sir Tiffany O'Regan, Steve O'Regan, and I were in my office and a few supporters on both sides. And the supporters just drifted away. They realised they weren't going to be helpful. So at the end of the evening, there was Tiffany O'Regan and myself, and one young Maori advisor from the Waikato, well, from Waitomo, in fact, Peter Douglas. And we sat down there, and Steve and I just argued our way forward and decided what I thought was the best that the Crown could do. And he took that back to his people and resolved it. So again, it came back to personal interaction between us and respect for each other and trust. Had to have trust.
Trust is a very important element, especially in the negotiating process. Were there other learned ways of negotiating through the fisheries settlement and engaging with Sir Graham, Tā Tipene and Sir Robert that you brought forward as you developed the fiscal envelope policy?
I just presume I was a natural negotiator. And maybe having an argumentative family, we had plenty of practice. But it was territory that I felt comfortable in dealing with people. And in a way, I'd imagine the National Party in the King Country saw something there because they came and asked me to stand. I mean, I wasn't involved in politics at all, political parties or whatever. And they invited me to stand, to seek the nomination and to come into Parliament in 1972, a long time ago.
Mm. When you took over the leadership of National and won the majority to lead the country, was there a plan in mind in terms of resolving these historical injustices? Did it kind of happen upon you because of other circumstances?
Well, there's always a bit of it happening, and I'm not sure what amount of debate we had on treaty settlements, but what I do know is in the early stages within the National Party, there were many who didn't believe there were issues to resolve. First of all, you've got to persuade people there is an issue to resolve before you can start resolving it. And if you have people, and there were many, and most in New Zealand, didn't believe there were issues to resolve. After all, Maori had the same opportunities to go to school, etc., and they had no historic sense because we didn't teach it. We didn't teach anything. I went to school at Raupatu in coastal Taranaki, only a few miles, few kilometres from Parihaka, and the invasion of that peaceful settlement of Parihaka. We were never taught a word of it. We were taught more about the kings and queens of England than we were about the invasion of Parihaka, where Te Whiti stood in peaceful rebellion to do what? To protect his land, or the land of his people. But we weren't taught that at school. I hope they're teaching it much, much better now. At least I tried to get them to move in that direction when I was there. I mean, what we are only, I think, slowly getting our minds around, that people were more interested in teaching us the history of England and Europe than they were of Aotearoa, New Zealand, because that would show some bad spots. And so it I don't know, it took a while, I guess, for most New Zealanders to accept that it needed to be change. But change has come.
After the 1989 Coal Corp case, Labour was still in government at the time.
Yes.
And effectively that initiated the first step towards direct negotiations. It's well known within Waikato that the settlement offered by then Richard Prebble was rejected because not only was it a process, it was a straight financial offer. And then there was a change of government, and you came into leadership with this potential for direct negotiations sitting in abeyance. How did you get to the point where you said, right, we're going to crack on, we're going to do something about this, and you appointed Doug Graham as the first Treaty of Waitangi negotiations minister? What conversation was happening around the cabinet table at the time?
Well, Doug Graham and myself were one side of the debate, and most of the others were at the other side. That's not true. There was others with us, but the majority were not with us. And I remember the first offer that the Minister of Finance and Treasury was suggesting we could settle it all for was, 300 million, 300 or 400 million. And I said we should take $1 billion. We should say we will spend $1 billion on this. Of course, we've spent dramatically more than that because I knew it was so big, and $1 billion back then was huge. And we then had to decide within that $1 billion how much was Tainui, how much was Ngātahu, and so forth. And there was a process of negotiations and, I guess, judgment again, this becomes, leaders have to have judgment. And what was our judgment as to what should be used to settle, say, Tainui and settle other ones? And all this was done virtually outside of the public gaze, not to hide things, but because it was just internal negotiations between both sides of the debate, the Crown and iwi. And I think because of essentially well-intentioned goodwill on both sides, we got there.
You did get there, and one of the things that I recall is that as a young person observing the process, in order to promote this treaty settlement process and the fiscal envelope approach, you engaged Sir Gardner, to go out amongst Māoridom and put down the potential negotiating pathway that you were proposing. I'm curious to know, as Wera went around the country and came back to report to yourself and to Cabinet, what types of conversations were you having at the time?
Well, in the beginning, I guess he told us that nobody was accepting it. It was the fiscal envelope became a dirty word. And yet I knew we had to have an overall figure in mind to be able to negotiate honestly with individual iwi, because they needed to know what percentage of the total was coming towards them, and they had their own views as to what that should be. So the fiscal envelope became a dirty word, not a word that we used in government, but it was the media had decided that's what it was. So Treasury were talking about 300 million, and I knew that was ridiculous. So I just plucked out $1 billion. I said, no, we'll put up $1 billion. And because that was huge.
To your point, though, was it just about the money, or did you evolve some of that thinking to say, look, yes, I've got a figure in mind, but we might have to think about other things?
Well, of course, it was much more than the money, but the money was important. It was an indication of, I think, good faith on the behalf of the Crown. The Crown was the one with the money. And so when I said $1 billion, that got people all excited because it was so big. And then we had to, I suppose, justify it and explain it and persuade people to come with us. And eventually we persuaded people to come with us.
Well, let me take you to the media and the comment that you made about the media giving references to the policies of your government at the time. Did the media bother to get themselves, well kind of informed about what you were trying to achieve? Were the media your allies in promoting the policy, or were they more antagonists?
No. The media had their normal superficial view, and they spread out the information through their outlets, but no, they weren't. I'm not sure they were on either side. I mean, they were commentators. But eventually, and it wasn't instant, eventually we got people to think a little deeper. And most people are decent enough if they get the facts. And it was getting the facts out there and getting them understood and getting them to realise that there was an issue. Firstly, we had to get New Zealanders collectively, including some of the Cabinet and many in Parliament, that there was an issue to be resolved. But that was way beyond their instinctive thinking.
Well, starting with your own electorate, surely, what were the kinds of conversations you were having with your own constituents about getting the issue resolved?
I'll put it another way around. I remember once my chairman, who was excellent, Arthur Collier from Taihape, and there was pushback in the electorate, and him saying words to the effect, well, you're wasting your time because Jim's made up his mind on this and he's going to do it. And that was it. I mean, it required a firmness of position. You couldn't be wimpish or waffly. You had to have a firm position. My firm position was we had to resolve in the best way possible, fairest way possible, Maori grievances. And they were genuine grievances. After all, their asset had been stolen, their land, and needed to be addressed.
Your relationship with Doug Graham to be able to progress this controversial policy, but in a way that you were able to achieve the outcome that you were seeking, which is a better future for New Zealand.
Yeah.
Were there conversations that you regularly had with Doug in order to give him confidence that he had your backing and that you were going to bring your cabinet colleagues with you?
Doug was hugely important, hugely important. He did so much legwork. And brought a decent mind, a fair mind to the issue as well. So, he did the details of the negotiation with Tainui, for example. And but I remember once when we must have had a lot of pushback in cabinet or something, and Doug turned in some despair to me and said, was I going to walk away too? And I said, no, of course I wasn't. But one should not underestimate the contribution that Doug Graham made to getting the settlement process going. There's no question about it to my mind. And he's still there as a very honourable and decent New Zealander. So we eventually persuaded Cabinet, and we had other members of Cabinet that we knew would always support us. My deputy McKinnon, Don McKinnon, Bill Birch, and people like that who would do it, whereas there are others that wouldn't, I won't name them, that found it too difficult. And they liked the simple slogan, look, everybody has equal opportunity, whereas we knew that wasn't true.
Did you recall the conversation you had with Doug Graham regarding the relativity clause?
I do, because it was hugely challenging to know exactly where you put your stake in the ground and said, this is it. And of course, as leader, I had to make the final stake in the ground and say, this is it. And that was all about relativity, because we had sort of the major iwi claims and then many, many minor ones. And you could only do your best. And from my perspective, to do what I thought was fair.
Do you remember where you were when you got the call from Doug Graham about the relativity clause being the final, deal breaker in the settlement?
I was at Tikawiti. I'd come home for Christmas. And that was the final deal breaker. That's when Doug and the late Bob Mahuta had reached agreement. Doug thought it was fair, and he wanted my approval. And I listened on the phone to him for some time as he explained it all, and I agreed he could continue and proceed.
Was there something he said to you after you said he could continue?
Not that I recall, but I'm sure he was very pleased. He'd worked bloody hard to get to that position, and to get it sanctioned off by the Prime Minister was obviously great satisfaction to him.
Mm. Can I take you to the moment at which the settlement had been agreed that night because of relativity clause, but when you arrived at Tuurangawaewae and you had taken Korotangi as a gesture and a symbol of goodwill, good faith to reinforce the relationship and what was going to happen, you would have walked onto the marae, seen all the kaumātua representatives of other iwi, young and old, together, and then looking at Mahinarangi Te Ariki Nui waiting for you. What was going through your mind at that moment?
It's hard to recall that, but I'd be certain it was one of satisfaction. We've made great progress, because Tainui, by agreeing to settle, really set the path forward. If that hadn't happened, we could still be back there arguing. But that set the path forward. Others could follow. And the whole issue of leadership has been in front. And the leadership of Tainui in negotiations with Doug Graham and myself was hugely important to the process. And great credit is due to Tainui to having the courage, Bob Mahuta having the courage to say, yes, we can move forward on this.
The final courage ultimately was between yourself as the Prime Minister of New Zealand and Te Riki Nui, Dame Te Atairangi Kahu, as the leader of Waikato. And there's a picture that captures how you looked at each other and then bending down to sign the agreement. That is a pinnacle moment in New Zealand's history. Is there a recollection of the conversation that you had with Te Ata at that moment?
It would have been short, but it's a pinnacle moment, I agree entirely. And the photograph is magnificent in that it captures us both in the same posture. Our hands are in the same position just before signing the document. And it strikes me too as one of those pinnacle moments. That was the beginning of a different New Zealand. And people don't perhaps reflect on that. That was the beginning of a different New Zealand. And move forward, of course, from there. That was the start, not the end. And we're still on that journey.
And that different New Zealand that you envisaged as a young man at Raupatu, as a farmer, a husband, now a grandfather, in the King Country to this moment now, what do you believe is the lasting legacy of that vision going forward as a result of the treaty settlement process?
The result is a more united New Zealand, a more accepting New Zealand. I mean, through all of history, civil wars have taken place because people couldn't accept people of a different colour skin. Nothing more complex than that. They were identical in every other way, but their colour of their skin was different. And it takes some people a long time to look past that, to look at the real person, not at the colour of their skin. And with New Zealand, I think we have gone past that, except for rare exceptions. And we see ourselves as equal in every respect, not just the law. And that's hugely important, that we can be together, understand each other, draw on both histories, which are dramatically different, and move forward.
How has this whole experience informed your own thinking about the role of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, and our constitutional future?
Well, the signing of the treaty in 1840 was a remarkable event when you look back on it over the years, now looking back to that those leaders, and full marks to those leaders on both sides, the Crown and the many iwi leaders who agreed to sign such a document and saw it as the stepping stone to the future. And so it has been. I mean, it was ignored for an awful long time. It's only in more latter years that we decided that, let's have a look at the foundation document. I think I was the first person at a speech in Waitangi, on Waitangi Day, that I referred to it as our foundation document. And of course it is. We have a very simple constitution. We have a single House of Parliament. We don't have a written constitution in detail like many other countries. Ours is built a lot on trust, which I think is wonderful. It's built a lot on trust. And there's trust between individuals as well as between ethnic groups. And long may that continue.
To the mokopuna of Waikato and your own mokopuna and those mokopuna of New Zealand, what is your vision for our country going forward?
I hope we continue to develop the cohesive relationship we have between the many different ethnicities in New Zealand now. Because at one stage there might have been European and Maori, but now there's from all corners of the world. And we have to be open and welcoming to people of different backgrounds. We must then also commit to understand their background, as they have to understand ours, and as they come to our country. And even as recently as yesterday, there was a scrap in Parliament about accusing people coming to tell us what to do. And people are not coming to tell us what to do. They're coming to be part of us. But they want to also have their own voice and to be able to talk about their own history as well as talking about ours.
There's one specific memory of the Waikato settlement that I'd like to bring you to, and that was when the Queen signed the royal assent and also including the apology to Waikato in their settlement. Everyone's curious to know, how did that happen?
Well, that was, if I describe it, as a brilliant move. Tainui had two requests in terms of settlement. Well, there had many, but the two big ones. One, that as land was taken, land should be returned. And that was relatively straightforward to understand. It's a question of where you get the land from, because the Crown had no land in the Waikato at that stage. And the second one was much more challenging, that as it was the Crown who had sanctioned the theft of 1 million acres from Tainui, the Crown should apologise. The Crown being the King in England, or as the case was then Queen Elizabeth II. And I remember saying to Tainui negotiators, I mean, if the current Queen has to go around the world and apologise for all the misdeeds of her forebears, she'll be a very, very busy woman. So we came up with the idea, in discussions with London, we had to get their agreement, that we'd put a full apology in the opening of the legislation to settle our agreement, put our agreement into law, and that then we would, when the Queen was coming to New Zealand for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting shortly thereafterwards, we would, as my advice to the Queen, would be to sign that legislation into law. Normally it's signed by the Governor-General on behalf of the Queen, but this time to get the Queen herself to sign it. They agreed they would do that. So I have a lovely photo on the wall with my hand outstretched, advising the Queen to sign the legislation. And that gave a signed legislation from the Crown to Tainui and the Tainui people for what had happened. And I thought that was a brilliant solution.
It was a masterstroke, and Waikato was very proud of the fact that the Queen had signed their settlement,
Yes.
being the first settlement of its kind,
Yes.
at a time when this was all new and forging a way forward. So a masterstroke in leadership, but also a visionary step to ensure that the trust and confidence going forward was going to continue well beyond the lives of people and etched in legislation. So Thank you for that. I have one cheeky question, and it's your funniest moment that you recall in your discussions with Sir Robert regarding a settlement, and whether there's something you might want to share, a comical moment or something that reminds you of people are real, you know, pragmatism is about
real.
people.
I think that's the important thing. People are real. I don't think we ever had a funny moment. I mean, it was all pretty serious stuff. And we had to... but the most important thing was important for Bob Mahuta and myself is that we trusted each other, that we would come to the table in good faith, we would negotiate in good faith, and we would honour what we agreed to. That was the most important thing. And despite, you know, various people in Parliament and elsewhere saying this is stupid and not necessary, and all of those things that were said, and are still said by some. And I mean, we have people now that want to rewrite the principles of the treaty. I mean, I'm not sure what they want to do. After all, the treaty was written an awful long time ago. It's hard to retrospectively change those things around. But they're playing politics. simple, crude, unprincipled politics, and should be pushed to one side because of that.
If I take your mind back to the time at which the fiscal envelope was being promoted, and it was a contentious topic, never been done before, everybody got fixated on a sum of $1 billion to settle all historical claims.
Yep.
Can you recall the type of media scrutiny that you had to respond to in the public domain at the time, where actually there was a whole lot of myth-making by the media?
The media, I think in general, thought it was too much. I mean, $1 billion back then was a huge sum of money. Of course, ironically, as time has passed, it's gone about 4 times that, or maybe 5 or 6 times that $1 billion, which is correct and proper because of the scale of the confiscations and the denial of Maori of their land. So I think the media were just scratching around the edges and stirring up trouble.
Mm. There was also the role of the media in terms of not wanting to show that this was a journey. It wasn't the destination. So to highlight the point, in those early years of the Waikato settlement, there were some challenges. There was a lack of capacity, mistakes were made, but also there were lots of learnings. But the media put undue scrutiny on a process that only Waikato could experience by doing. How politically were you observing the information that was coming out from the media and the level of, I think, undue criticism?
Well, of course, I read it. You have to know what others are saying. But I'm not sure I was influenced by their views very much at all. I had made up my mind, and working with Doug Graham in particular and others in Cabinet, reached a conclusion as to how we move the settlement process forward. And we stayed with that. And the media scattered around the edges, and they were doing their job to try and tell the public, because they had to try and understand what we were doing. I mean, this was new territory in terms of scale and approach. There had been various small attempts earlier to resolve this or that issue between the Crown and Maori, but this was dramatically bigger. This was wholesale. This was where we were going to try and get a final settlement for that, and that was a word we used, the final settlement. And to do that, you had to have a very substantive settlement. And eventually we got people to agree with us.
In order to take the public forward, did you require Doug Graham or anyone else for that matter holding regular briefing sessions with the media so that they would be better informed and the commentary might be more balanced?
I don't know that we had regular formal sessions, but of course both of us, Doug and myself, and other ministers, spoke to the media on a pretty regular basis. We got some buy-in from the media who could see that there were issues that had to be resolved. They were highly sceptical that what we were doing was going to resolve them. But eventually people came on side. And if you're confident in your position, then I think you have the capacity to persuade others, which we did.
You did. And in terms of the most helpful role that media could have played at the time, have you got any reflections on what that may have looked and sounded like?
A helpful role would have been to come out in a full-blooded editorial and saying that what the government was doing, what the minister was doing, what the Prime Minister was doing was absolutely what was needed. But no, of course,
every politician's dream.
I'm going to say, of course, they weren't going to do that. No. I know. We worked our way forward. But never mind. That's good.
I never asked you about Bill Birch's final calculation about the importance of the treaty settlement. He was the MP in Port Waikato, Pukekohe at the time, Franklin. Was there kind of extra convincing that you needed to do for the Minister of Finance at the time?
No, Bill was very good. We were close colleagues in Parliament, and he would obviously take my advice on issues like this because I was much closer to it. But he was very good and very helpful, and always stayed on the right side from my perspective of the issues. So I could always rely on Bill being there.
Every leader needs a sounding board and somewhere to place their worries. You would have needed that at certain junctures of this whole process. Did you want to perhaps characterise what that looked and felt like?
It'd be wrong to just identify one minister. I mean, I work closely with all my ministers, but there's a few at the top that I knew that they had to be on side or I wasn't going to bring the doubters. So you had doubters and you had those who were prepared to be persuaded, like Don McKinnon, my deputy, Bill Birch, obviously Minister of Finance and so forth, and Doug Graham in the centre of all that. That helped me persuade the rest. No question about it. Without their support, I wouldn't have got everybody else to agree. But finally had to have everybody to agree. It was a cabinet decision. We were dealing with cabinet decisions.
The strength of your conviction came very much from personality traits and also experience. How much of it do you put down to your Irish upbringings?
Oh, I think quite a lot. Though my parents didn't spend much time talking, not enough time, talking about Irish history, I wish they'd spent more. But clearly it influenced me because I knew as I learnt more that the Irish were like Maori. They had their land confiscated too, and their country overrun by the same people who overran New Zealand. So there was an empathy there. There's no question about that.
I often reflect on the amount of time that Sir Robert, my father, put into negotiating the settlement, but also the toll that it took on my mother and us as a family in terms of the mental energy, the personal commitment, the personal sacrifices and the like. I imagine it would have been similar for yourself holding the station of leader of the country and stewarding through difficult and challenging issues like the treaty settlement process. How did you manage your leadership role with your family role?
Because I had a wonderful wife who did more of the family because I wasn't there. And but Joan, tremendously supportive of the work I did on treaty and treaty settlements, and we shared a very common perspective on the way forward. And it's about leaders seeing the way forward. I emphasize this, I speak often on leadership to groups of young people of various sorts, that just repeating yesterday is not leadership. You've got to see a different tomorrow if you're leading. And you've got to put your energy into trying to achieve that different tomorrow. And that will always be true. Unfortunately, some people can't go past yesterday and they want to return to yesterday. Whereas, of course, leadership means you see a different tomorrow. And Joan could see that different tomorrow. I could see that different tomorrow. And of course, Joan taught at Pangarehu School where there was a lot of students from Parihaka. So she had interaction with a lot of Maori students as well.
That different tomorrow is something we all aspire to. Waikato has now reached its 30-year milestone since settlement.
Yeah.
What do you think, from where you sit, the next 30 years might hold?
Well, New Zealand will be a much browner country in terms of its population, and that in itself will help the inclusiveness of New Zealanders as we embrace more warmly the diversity that New Zealand will be in 30 years' time. It'll be very diverse. And this could pose some challenge for Maori, because there won't only be Maori and Pākehā. There'll be the Pākehā, Maori and others. And I look forward to it. I won't be here, but I look forward to it. I mean, I think we have the capacity to manage that.
It's something we do very uniquely within Te Ao Māori. We ensure that the whakatauki or the visionary statement of a leader can be held on to. With your mokopuna in mind, what would be your leadership statement to give them encouragement about continuing to look forward?
They grew up in our household and heard us, and that's the informal thing. That's what teaches them. And I mean, I have two daughters who teach. One of them is learning Maori at the moment. And I mean, she's been teaching for a few years, but she decided she would be better suited for the job if she knew more Maori. So she's learning, as we speak, she's learning Maori. So the language is hugely important to every society. It's what holds societies together. And I know that many in New Zealand think they hear too much Maori now. I think that's a mistake. The more they become comfortable with the language, the better it will be. And of course, countries across the world speak more than one language. That is not unique or anything else. I mean, that's quite common in many parts of the world. Most of Europe speaks more than one language. And so we will become more comfortable with the Maori language.
And your advice to your mokopuna?
Learn Maori if you have the opportunity. Yeah. Learn and understand it, because it'll give you a better understanding of Maori people. No, it's very interesting. I don't know whether son Matthew will have to learn Malagasy, because I have no idea. I've heard the language, of course, but it doesn't resonate, no. No.
Language and identity go hand in hand, and it's important for the future.
Oh, it is. Language is hugely important.
Well, thank you very much for that. I want to again reinforce that this is a real opportunity for mokopuna of Waikato to thank you and the courage of your leadership, but also the courage of your vision for what New Zealand can and should be looking like. So mihi ana ki a koe i tēnei wā. Thank you very much.